So far, from what we've been seeing in the work and your interactions in the past classes, everyone's starting like understanding things at a pretty good level. Um, we are gonna start off with a quiz soon, but I just want to say that they just keep it up, you know? So yeah, we will be sharing the quiz in a couple minutes with you guys. Okay, so let me pull up the homework real quick. Sorry for the delay. Let's get this going. Okay. So, number one, what does the following code output if the variable value is 5? Well, let's go over it. If value is not equal to 5, well, it's 5, so you just kind of skip that part. Then it says else if value is greater than 0. Is 5 greater than 0? Does anyone know 5 is greater than 0?
Yeah.
Then that is true.
Yeah.
And because that's true, you'd end up with output 2. So your answer should be B for that one. Number 2, what is the following code output if the variable value is 21.5? Okay, well, let's just do it how we did it before. If value is less than 1, that is definitely not less than 1. Else if value is greater than 30, that is not greater than 30. 21.5 is less than 30. Else if value is not equal to 0, 21.5 is not 0, so it would be output 3, aka question or answer C. How many times will the following code run? You have int I is equal to 10, do, console write output, I minus minus. Does anyone know what this would be?
Five.
It would be 5 times because each time it does that, it subtracts 1 from I again and again. So after you do it the first time, I becomes 9, then 8, then 7, then 6, and then it doesn't do it another time because by then, if it did that, then I would equal, well, 5, and it says while I is greater than 5, so that should be the answer. What will the value of out, what will be the value of output after the loop? Okay, well, if you look here, int output is equal to 20, and then you have a for loop where you're starting I off at 0, and you're saying I is less than output, I plus plus. So, as it starts at 0 and it goes up to 19, which is basically 1 to 20, but off by 1. Okay. And inside, you're doing output is equal to output minus 1. So, the first time it goes around, you're going to get 19, then 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10.
Because output is decreasing, but but it's looping until output. By the time output is equal to 10, I will end up being 10, so the loop will exit. So it'll meet in the middle and be 10. So the answer is 10. For question number 5, which loop loops for the longest amount? So looking at this, um, looking at this first one, int I is equal to 0, while I is less than 1 million. I think it's 1 million. Yeah, it's 1 million. So this loop will run for about 10 million times, minus 1. Now this one, int I is equal to 0, while I is greater than -1 and I plus plus. This loop will run forever because it's comparing it to -1. So the loop will run while it's greater than -1, but it's not going lower, it's only increasing. So I will never be below -1, which means that this loop will run forever, which means that no matter what the other answers are, this one will be the answer because it'll run forever. And then looking at number 6, if the value of the variable value is true, which statement also returns true? So looking at the first one, this is not, not, not value. So that ends up just being a not. So this will return false if value is true, because two nots will cancel each other out. In this one, if not value or value. So because it's an or, that means that this statement will return true if at least one of them is true. And because in this case, value is true, this statement will end up returning true no matter what not value is. So this will be the answer. And then just looking at the other one, value is not equal to value. This will always return false because value is always equal to value. Looking at number 7 now, which statement returns true if and only if value 1 is 2 times value 2. So looking at number A, the first option is you're multiplying value 1 by value 2, and you're seeing if that equals 2. Well, this will only equal true if this doesn't, it will only equal 2 if, let's say, value 2 is 1, and value 1 is 1, right? But it could be any two values whose, when you multiply them, equals 2. So this could be any possible range of answers. Now looking at B, if value 2 divided by value 1 is equal to 0.5. So you're getting the ratio. And if value 1 is 2 times greater than value 2, it will always simplify to 1/2, which is 0.5, which means that this right here is the answer. Looking at the other ones, this has the same issue as the first option. So there's an infinite number of values that value 1 and value 2 could be, and equal to 2. Same thing with this one. Now number 8, which statement only ever outputs false no matter what the value b1 is. So it can only ever output false even if b1 is true. And I know it's a typo here. This should be b1 here. Sorry about that. Let's look in this first one. If not b1 is not equal to not b1. So we can ignore the nots now because they're on both sides. So if b1 is not equal to b1, well, b1 is always equal to b1, so this will always be true. If not b1, this will output false if b1 is true, but we're considering all values of b1. So if b1 is false, then this will output true. So this is not an answer. If b1 is not equal to, sorry, if b1 is ORed with b1, this will output true if b1 is true. And then if b1 is not equal to b1, well, b1 is always equal to b1, so this will output false. And I realized a mistake. That implies that this one is also true as well. So sorry about that mistake.
Wait, then what was the actual answer?
The actual answer would be either D or A.
So are they both correct?
Yeah.
Moving on to the slides. Um, so today we are going to go over object-oriented programming. So, Manmohan, if you'd like to start us off.
So object-oriented programming is a type of programming where you have separate objects that all have their own data and functionality that interacts with each other. So that's the main way that a lot of game engines work. When you program in them, they all use object-oriented programming, but maybe besides like a few exceptions. A lot of the really big names like Unity, Godot, Unreal Engine, they all use object-oriented programming.
So, classes are the objects that will contain the functionality and data that we use. So classes are kind of like containers or like blanket things, and they can contain like a lot of things, and they don't go inside functions or like other classes because they're basically standalones. And you can, if you look to like the right of the slide, you can declare them in two different ways. And so classes can contain different things in them. They can contain variables, which can be called fields. And fields are variables stored in your class, basically. They can be like any data type, and you can also put classes in other classes if you have them as fields. And when it comes to fields, you need to specify, or you don't need to, but it's recommended to specify whether they're private or public, because private fields basically can't be accessed from another class unless you have something to change that. And you can initialize your your fields basically. So like if you look down there, setting a default value for fuel amount. Fuel amount, that should not be a bool, that should be a float, but point still stands. Now, methods. Methods are basically functions. They are like bits of code that you can run. And that's where you usually write most of your code inside of the class. And if you see that note right there, the static void main that you have been writing in your code it is a method. So like what we've been running our code in itself is a method.
So methods can have inputs and have outputs. That's how they interact with other data or data in their own class. So to have an input inside the parentheses of the method, you define the variable type of your input and then a name for it. It doesn't need to the name just follows all other naming conventions in C sharp. And you have multiple inputs, you separate them with a comma. So for this example, public void method name int num comma string text inside the parentheses, right? And then if you're an output, you can only output a single value. So looking at this example, you have two inputs, and you're returning the addition of those two inputs. So this return statement here, basically gives that outputs that variable or whatever value you have after return statement, and then close off with a semicolon. Notice how we're returning a float because a float plus a float is another float. But looking up here, where in the previous example we had void, we have a float. So the syntax of a method that returns some sort of value could have, whether it's public or private, have the data type that it returns. And then you have everything else. Also note that after you return, everything after the return statement will not run because the return statement exits your code. So nothing after it will run. It's basically leaving the function into the previous function. Now, instantiation is a really big concept in object-oriented programming. You can see in the graphic here. we have the class. The class contains like the structure of an object. It contains all the methods and contains all the fields. So to you can't use the class that you've created until you've initialized it, and you can have multiple initializations of a class. So in this example, if we have a class called a car, you'd initially declare it kind of like a variable. You'd have the type, which is a car in this case, the name of it, and an equals, and then use this new keyword here. New car with semicolons, or not semicolons, with parentheses and then a semicolon at the end. This tells your computer to create a new instance of your class, or of your class, yeah. Then once you've created a new instance, you can access certain fields and certain methods using a dot. No, you can only access public methods this way. You can't access private methods from outside the class. But once you've initialized, or once you've instantiated your class, you can use your you can use the fields just as they were normal variables, and same with the methods as if they were a regular method, like how you've been outputting to the console. In this way, you can have multiple instantiations of class. All right, so now I'm going to open up Visual Studio
Can I
and
ask
show
something
you an
real quick?
example. Yep, sure.
Yeah.
Like, why do you need to return stuff? Like when you have like a class there?
You use a return statement if you want to output a value. So in this add method, right? Oh, I need to drink some water. In this
Yeah,
add
but
method, you want to return a plus b. You want to give whoever called the function or called the method a plus b. So you give them that number by returning. And I'll show you an example right now. So in Visual Studio, how you do this is outside of your class program, outside of that, you can just say public a class, and you can have whatever the name of a class is, and then surround it with curly braces. This public is important because you need, this is how your class is accessible outside. Without a public, you can't use it anywhere else. So for fields, you just, let's say you want to have a value, a floating point value, float. This is how you would initialize or declare your floating point value inside a class. And you can initialize it, you can't give it a value initially, let's say 100. So now initially your value is going to be 100. So in your main method, how you'd access that is you say your class, as if you're writing a variable, is equal to new, this is a new keyword, your class, with parentheses and then a semicolon. So once you've done that, you can access your class dot your value and say set it equal to 50. But what we can also do is say your class, another your class, and initialize a new one. Another, these two are separate objects. They're completely separate. They can have separate values. They're not connected. The only thing they have in common is that they have a field called your value. So I can set another your class a value to, let's say, 200. And now these are two separate things that exist simultaneously. Sorry, my throat is scratchy a little bit.
I have another question. Instead of floats, you can also do strings in here as well.
You
For
can
the
do
public.
any data types. You can have an integer and then replace these with integers. You can have a string, you can have a boolean, you can have anything. You can have anything there. You have any data type here. Now with a method is kind of similar. Your method. And this looks kind of similar to the main method here, except it's not static and doesn't have this. Now with this method, you can say console.write line, whatever you want, and you can output your value. Right, and then if you go back up here, we can call your class's method. And we can call the method on this other class, this other instantiation of this class. These two methods will do the same exact code, except with different, they'll output a different variable because the values are different in each class. So if I then run the code, it might take a little bit. You see it outputs 50 and then 200. As right here, we set the first value to 50, the second value to 200. Now we can also ask it to have an input. We can also have an input into function. Let's say int input, and we can output your value times the input. And now the computer's going to yell at me because now we need to input a value here. We can't leave this blank because it's asking for an input, and we haven't provided any. So let's just output on the 4. Let's input 4, and then let's input 1. And now it will output 50 times 4, and then 20 times 1, which both end up to be 200 because 50 times 4 is 200. And then if we want to return a value, we can do return, let's say the input. Just make it simple for now. And now it's yelling at me because this output type is a integer, but the function is outputting a void. So we need to change it to int. And now we can output an integer using the return keyword. So now to capture this output, what you do is you
Wait a second, for the input, why is there no console.readline?
it's just a name that we're using for this variable. We can change it to something like value with a lowercase v,
Oh,
and then yeah, it's just a name that we're using to call this input value into this method. But to capture this return value right here, you just make a variable. I'll say int method output, and set it equal to the method of the class. This is similar to what you've done for a console.readline, except you're doing it with a custom method. So let me just make an example here. So as you can see, this syntax is very similar to console.readline. console is the class and readline is a method in the console.readline example. Except in this case, your class is the class and then your method is the method, whatever you want to call those things. And then this method output, we can output that as well. So console dot on the right line output. And this will run the code in here, which will output your value times value. Then it will set method output to the value of input. Then we'll output it. So when you run the code, it should output 200, then 4, then 200. And that's exactly what it outputs. So you don't need to have just one method. You can have as many methods as you want in a class. Same thing with fields. I'd also like to showcase the difference between a public method and a private method. Private, let's say void, just to make it simple for now. Alright, so now we have a private method here. Now, if you go back up here, we can remove this for now. If you go back up here and try to access that private method, your class dot private method, it's going to tell us it's inaccessible due to its protection level, and the code will not run. It will not run. See, if it changes to public, then we can access it perfectly fine, and the code will run, right? So let's say change it back to private. If you can't access it from the outside, the reason that private methods and private fields exist is so that internally you can access them. So inside your method, we can call private method inside of the class. Now you notice because it's these two methods are in the same class, we don't prefix the method with anything. We just type in the method name and in parentheses. So with this, you can have a public method that accesses private methods and private fields. Let's just put an example of a private field. Private, let's call it a string. And then let's just call it private string. Let's initialize it to something.
Like change a private, like a private method into a public like method from like outside of the network?
No, you can't access a private method or a private field from the outside. You can only access public methods and public fields from the outside.
Like what I'm trying to say is, can you like, for example, let's say like you get an achievement in a game, right, which unlocks something. So like, does that work?
You can't change whether something is public or private while the code is running. You can't do that. But you can do something like what you're talking about in other ways. Like if you have an achievement that unlocks something, you can just have it so you can have a Boolean value that enables when you unlock the achievement, and then that Boolean value being enables other stuff. But we can talk about that later.
Okay.
So we have private string here. As usual, if you try to access that private string from the outside, it's gonna yell at us, right? That's not gonna work. However, we can access private string from the inside. Let's say console.writeLine private string. This will work because we're accessing the private string from inside the class. So if you want a value that you don't want accessible from the outside, then you set it to private. If you want a method you don't want accessible to the outside, let's say because it's maybe because you don't really need it in the outside, but it's used a lot inside your class, then you can set that to private, because that the helper methods that do one thing a lot in your code to be private methods. Also, with this return value, if you try to output this private string after this return value, you see the our IDE knows what we're trying to do, and we'll say unreachable code detected. But if you try to run it, what we'd expect is for it to print hello with an exclamation mark. But if you run it, it doesn't output that. It only outputs this first one. So after everything after return statement will not run. And I believe we should do a pop quiz now. For this a question, the correct answer is an organized piece of code that can be executed. It is not a particular form or procedure used to write code because the method is the code. And a method is not a function exclusive to a class. As you can see here, when we have a public method, we can access that from the outside of the class. So it's not exclusive to the class. And it is not code that changes the approach of things.
Have any questions for us? Like if you don't understand something or if you want to see if
I
something's
also have a
broken.
question.
What is it?
So like when you're doing like a private string, like why does it have to be private? Like what happens when it's public?
Well, the
When
only
it's
difference, yeah, sorry.
when it's public, you can access from the outside. So if you change this to public real quick, then from the outside you can do your class dot private string, and then you can change something else. Maybe you don't want that though. Maybe you don't want someone like, what if the value of the string is very sensitive? What if it's a very, you don't want it to change, and you only want it to change when you expect it to change. If you don't want anyone on the outside messing with anything, then you can set it to private, and then you can't edit it from the outside. Or maybe you don't, it doesn't need to be edited from the outside, then you can set it to private. But if you're not expecting anyone else to interact with their code, then it could be okay to just set everything to public if you know what you're doing and you're not like messing with stuff. Any other questions?
No.
So I think if everyone understands, then it should be time for us to maybe just do a quick pop quiz before we move on to classwork. So let me just launch it right here, and you guys have 30 seconds to a minute. A field, a value input to a method, that is not called a field. That's called an argument or a parameter, depending on which part you're looking at. The requirement for conditionals, that is not true either. I do not know where some of you got the conditionals part from because a field is data that is stored in the class. It is any variable type or class type.
Okay, so let's get started with the classwork. So the first question is to create a method named add number, which takes in two integers and returns the sum of both numbers. So I'll give you guys around 5 minutes to solve this question before we call on some people to share their methods. So basically, this one is rather simple. So if you can, yeah. So basically, we just have to write so first we have to start off with the identifier of the method, the scope, which is public in this case, and then the return type, which is int, and then the name, which is add numbers. And then we have to put up parameters, which is int num1 and int num2. There's no specification on the name of the field, so you guys can use whatever you want, like X and Y, but guys should be as specific as possible with your field names. So, and then we can just do return num1 plus num2.
Pop quiz is up. So let's go over this real quick. What is the proper syntax for a method? So, first one is void public method name. I'm pretty sure those are parentheses. Yeah. So that's wrong because you want your public. Yeah.
I also have another question.
Yeah. What's your question?
For some instances, will it will it be an error if you make it private or public?
You mean your method?
Yeah, if a method is public or private in certain circumstances, will it return as an error?
Well, I mean, if you're trying to call a private method like outside of that class, then that would give you an error, if that's what you mean. And if it was a public one, then it wouldn't give you an error. It'd just do what the method says in it.
Oh,
So yeah, public and private just like changes whether you can use it outside of the class or not. And so the reason why the first one's wrong is because you want public or private to be in front of your return type. The second one's wrong because your parentheses should be after your name. So your third one should be right. The fourth one is wrong because public is lowercase and public and private are both lowercase. They're not uppercase. And same goes for void.
Okay,
So
we can move on to the next question. Okay, so the next question is basically creating a method that prints the first 5 powers of 2 to the console. I'll give you guys another 5 minutes to solve this one.
Did anyone get the output?
so can you again show me how you can make it so it is actually printable?
You can just do console.writeLine inside the method, and that will print it if you
No,
call the
like
method.
on the main void.
So you can just do, for this question number 1,
So assuming you have you're initializing your class like this using a new keyword, you can just write the name of it, write the name of your variable, and have a dot, and write the name of your method with any parameters if you have any inside the parentheses. So you can write the name of a variable with a dot.
also just a note for that example shown, the the method does return a number, but you still have to actually print it out. So you still have to do a console.writeLine if you actually want to show it in the console.
Or can I share?
sure, go ahead. So, would you like to go over what you did for your code?
Oh yeah, I first did public class. I just named it hello capital since I cannot take only lowercase letters. Then I just named it my method up here. I just did the I named the method on the main string. Then I printed out the first 5 powers of 32 and there.
Yeah, that looks good. That's perfect. You could have also done this using a loop to write it, but I think that's better because there's only a specified number of powers that you have to print. Yeah, that's good.
I mean,
Oh,
usually in most
yes. Okay.
cases, if
Yeah.
it was like, if you were finding the first five powers of any number, it would be better to do a loop just for like the sake of it. But this is a completely valid way for like the actual question.
There is also a VS. And so I could also do something like that. Oh,
I mean, you can keep on writing them, but if the code, for example, gave you like you have to input the number of powers and then print it based on that. Like if the input said seven and you have to print seven powers of twos for seven powers of twos, then you cannot just straight up like how hard print them. So for that, you would have to use a loop. That's what we were trying to say.
Plus, imagine if you had a
yeah,
question
but
that
how do
was,
you use powers in a loop?
So
Oh,
basically, you can keep a secondary variable for keeping track of the power, and then you can just
maybe
iterate
Srish, you
over.
could share your screen and show that. Yeah.
Here, I can
Yeah.
share my
Okay.
screen and I can show this.
Okay.
So how we do this? We can have, let's say, public void because I'm not outputting anything. Is of two. All right. How you would do this is you can have a for loop, right? This length, let's say, between the first five powers, let's say five. Then you can have another variable, and it's called output. Let's initialize it to 0. Then we can do output. No, we started with 1 actually. Output times equals 2. This will multiply the output by 2. So if the output is 5, then the output every loop will multiply output by 2, increasing it by another power of 2. Then we do
Oh,
console dot write line output inside the loop, and then
so that'll be the first 5 powers.
oh wait, I need to actually call this function. This will be the first 5 powers starting from 0. Because we start from 1, so it'll be starting from 0. Wait, that's not your class dot powers of 2. Oh, sorry. And then 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. So then what you can do from here, you can have an input variable, let's say int num of powers. And instead of going up to 5, you can go up to the number of powers. And here you can input some crazy number like let's say 200. And then let's see what happened here. And here now I can showcase something interesting that happens with really big numbers. It went to the powers of 2 up until here, and then the numbers
Why
got
is
too
it
big.
stopped at the 30 second?
The numbers got too big. It couldn't represent them.
Yes, so the biggest number is 2.147 billion, or 2 to the power of 32. So the signed 32-bit integer, I guess.
Usually you won't encounter stuff like that, but a more reasonable number like 15, that will work fine.
because integers as a data type can only go so high in terms of numbers.
That's just a limitation of computers, but normally you won't deal with that. That's usually not an issue. It's only when doing ridiculous stuff like this.
I would also like to add, like, if it was like another scenario where it was just like the power of any number, you could have like another input, and you could just make it that would be output times equals, and then whatever that number is. So you could just like streamline that powers function and make it apply to anything. That's the reason why doing it this way is like the most recommended, because it teaches you how to get used to that type of workflow.
What is it? Output times equals 2.
This line right here multiplies the output by 2, and sets that to output. So it basically multiplies it by 2 and stores it back into output. So that's the same thing as saying
32.
output is equal to output times 2. It's the same thing as saying that, except it's a simpler way of writing this.
Mashik, do you have a question?
Yeah, what's the limit to how many powers you can reach up to?
The limit for integers, I'm pretty sure, is positive and negative 2 to the 32nd power, unless I'm wrong.
Yeah,
The limit is in the positive direction, the limit is 2 to the 32 minus 1, and the limit in the negative direction is 2 to the 32. I'm pretty sure, but because that's simply because you have 32 ones and zeros to store the number, but you don't need to know the specifics of how that works. You're never really
Can I
gonna
go up to 2 to the
use
power
that.
of 64 if we just push it hard enough?
You need a different type of variable for this. The regular integer that you normally use is a 32-bit integer. We can do,
So
I believe, int 32 or int 64
for
instead. And then this is gonna be int 64, and then this I believe will output more than 32, but I haven't really
so I
worked with
can
this very
put
much,
int
honestly.
1024. Oh wait.
And yes, this went beyond. A 32-bit integer would stop right here.
To be honest, though, is like numbers these big, you're usually never gonna see them like in like actual code.
I know, but I
Because
just want to like test around with it.
oh yeah, no, that's completely understandable.
Yeah, but how do you input int 64? I only got like a light green number. You guys got a dark green number.
When you're doing int64 and int like 128, you want to have a capital I on it.
Oh,
Because it's not a default type. Like int right here with the lowercase is like a default type. That's what a lot of the code uses, and it's like really common. And you can see right here, and if you look at the tool or the tooltip, an int is just a capital I in 32. But it can go up to int 128, but that uses a lot more memory. It's not really needed. So 32 bits is good enough for like almost every applications besides like if you're doing some like science or some like really heavy engineering application. You normally don't need like 128 integer bits. Like, but with like an int 128, this can go a lot more. This can go. These numbers can get huge with a 128-bit integer, but you never need this number, whatever this number is.
I know, I
In
know.
real
I
life.
just want
So
to test the
yeah,
thing.
that's fine. I recommend experimenting around so you might learn things.
Wait, where'd you put int 64 after the method? I see the question. Okay.
So the specific int types are just like for the variable that you have in output. That way, when you're changing it, it can go higher than usual. It's like int64, int128. Those are just variable types. They're the same data types as like int and stuff, just like more specific.
so basically for this one, you have to create a method that takes in a number, and then you have to return the string, which is basically about the number, with that number repeated, with the number amount of separated, with spaces in between. So basically, if I put in 2, then you should output 2 space 2.
But I've got here so far, it's not like complete, but I'm trying to figure out how to return a string.
Okay, I think you might have misread the question because yeah, you have to take the input for the number of times from like the user. So it's not
So to
specified.
use console.readline.
Yeah, you have to use console.readline and then pass that number to the method. and then
So
print
it's
that number
like
that many times.
user input convert to int32 console.readline thing.
Another thing
Yeah.
is the syntax of that is all types of messed up because when you're making that string, that should be on a separate line and that should be like string, then you name it is equal to that value. So yeah.
So you have to remove the string part because whenever you're trying to return a string, you can just use double quotes and then a semicolon at the end. Yeah, that's the correct format to return. But you should
Oh,
also change your method return type to string.
So where you've written void underneath M,
yeah, void.
change that to a string because you want to return a string. So you want to change that from void to string because
Yeah.
that's the type of
Oh,
variable you are
so
returning.
now it will work because now we have a string and it will turn.
Well, you have to call it. It's not going to print anything if you don't call it.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. So just quickly. But it says it's not a string n.
While you edit your code, we can just go over the solution because we don't have much time
Yeah,
left
but
for today's class. So,
okay.
Okay, I'm going to share my
yes.
screen and present a solution.
Okay.
So for this question, we have taken a number and then returned a string with that number repeated for that number of times. So let's take in a public string because we are outputting a string at the end. I'm gonna output number. This is going to be the name of it. And I'll say int. And let's say just the input is going to be a number, shortening to num. So we need to do a bit of loops. So we need to have a for loop, and we're going to loop for this number of times. And then we're going to have an output string. So string output. Let's initialize it to an empty string, right? Then every loop we want to add the number to string and add a space because we're going to separate everything with a space. So you do output plus equals num plus a space in quotation marks.
I just want one more question. What's the
Sure.
second line to name a thing, to name a function again? The second line, it's like
What's that?
the second line to name a function.
You mean where you have like a public string output numbers as an example, or
Yeah, but like what's the main string?
oh, you mean when you're calling your function,
Yeah.
you type in your class dot,
Oh yeah, I mean
and
I
with a
remember
dot
now.
you'd have whatever. All right,
Oh yeah, I remember now. Okay.
going back to here. Once we have this, we're just gonna return output. All right, and then this function is complete. It doesn't output anything. We'll output that ourselves. So up in here, I'm just gonna delete this for now. We're gonna take in a number from the user. So we're going to and user input is equal to convert that to int32. I'm going to take in a console dot read line. Expand the window. And then with that, we call our class dot output numbers with the user input. But we also want to output that. So we're gonna just do console dot write line and surround it surround a function with parentheses. And this will do when you run the program. It's gonna have us input something, let's say 5. And it outputted 5 times with spaces. So this is how you would write this. You just have a loop and you just have an output string and add on the number with a space in a loop. Any questions?
Before we move on to the next question, let's do a quick pop quiz.
Not an object. I mean,
Oh shoot. Okay, so it's, yeah, so for a class, it should be yeah, it should be number 3, I think. Public class name.
yeah, that's what I put.
Just as a reminder, when you have a class, you don't put parentheses. You just put the name for class and then curly braces. You don't need parentheses.
Okay. Okay, we can move on to the next question then. Okay, it's nobody, we can just go over the question since we're running out of time. So basically you have to declare the class, which is public class dog in this case. And then you just declare the fields. So it should be string color, string breed, and then integer age.
Oh, so it's public string color, public string
Yeah,
breed.
you don't have to do specifically public. You can do private or anything. The scope doesn't matter because it's not specified in this question. So yeah. But this is the requirement.
Why are there warnings?
It's the warnings are just because these are non-nullables, which basically means a string can't be null, so you have to set it as something. But it doesn't really matter too much. It'll just be an empty string. At least I think that's how it works. It doesn't really matter too much.
Yeah,
Okay,
red lines are usually the main issue.
yeah. Okay, so before we end off to the session, I would like to have one last pop quiz question. So let me just launch that. So for this question, the correct answer was number A. Number the first one, which is car equals new car. The second one is wrong because you're not declaring the name of the variable. You always have to declare the name when you declare something. And the third one is wrong because you're not initializing it properly. You always have to use a new keyword, and it's also not capitalized properly. And D is just plainly wrong. Like that's just wrong. So no. So the correct answer is number 1.
In the interest of time, like we couldn't continue with rest of the questions, and I have sent questions 6 to 10 in the chat. So apart from the homework, if you have time, just go ahead and work on these and let us know if you have any questions. So I would really appreciate if you come up with a lot of questions because that's how you understand. See, if you get stuck up somewhere, uh, you know, uh, uh, just let us know so that the instructors could exactly see where you're missing it out, and then they would help you bridge the gap. So with that, I think we are pretty much done for the day. And the homework cutoff is on March the 3rd, I believe, by 11 p.m. PST. So make sure you finish your homework before that and then enter your scores in the bubble sheet. Um, yeah, that's it. Any questions do you have for me today? All right. So in case if you have any issues with entering the score, feel free to send a message through Message Central. I keep checking that pretty regularly, so I would correct the scores there. That's it, guys. Thank you for joining the session 3. Hope to see you all the next session. Thank you. Bye.
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 And
Bye.
Thank you.
For those who need to stay back, we can help
Bye.
you out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye,
yeah, I
guys.
think
Thank
Tanvish
you.
had a
Thank you.
doubt. Tanvish, are you there?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Yeah, okay. So now, once everybody leaves, I'm gonna, give you the rights, and then you could show your screen and show where, you were getting stuck. Yeah, share your screen now, and then.
Also, for number one, for some reason, it deleted my work.
Oh, that's okay. Don't worry. But you had a question related to that number one?
Yeah, but I don't really remember. So, okay, I'll share my screen.
Yeah.
Visual Studio, share. Can you all see?
Yeah.
For this one, I tried it a different way and it didn't work. So, int equals f, int f equals 2, and the loop. For some reason, it says there's stuff wrong in it. I remove this. Yeah, it says there's a lot.
It's because you have a args.length in the loop. If you remove that, I think that should work, including the length as well, because you currently have 4 statements inside that for loop when there should only be 3. So just remove that length with the parentheses, and it should work.
The parentheses? Oh, this one?
And no, where it says length,
Oh, those.
and then remove the word as well.
What?
Where it says length, you can remove that.
I can just remove length entirely?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then that semicolon, yep, you can remove that as well. That's good. And then after the for loop, after the parentheses, there's a extra semicolon there. That you can remove.
Like on the same line as your for loop right there. Yeah, you don't need that.
And also the semicolon after I plus plus, you can remove as well.
Oh, so you don't need that. Okay.
And then you can remove, yep. And then that should, now we can do is, we can use console.log, or not console.log, console.writeLine to output f inside the loop. You should have you should have f equals f times 2 outside the console write line, and inside the console.write line just have f.
Oh,
So just keep them separate.
okay. Just F and F.
Also put a semicolon.
All right.
And can you scroll down? I think you have like some extra stuff underneath.
Yeah, here.
I believe it's causing an error. Oh yeah, where it says Okay, you're trying to. Is that what you try to do for number 5?
I'm pretty sure this was number 5.
Yeah, where it says a public dog with with the parentheses,
Wait,
you
this?
can remove that and the brackets, the curly brackets around it.
Oh,
You don't need that.
oh wait, so
So you have extra curly brackets.
and this.
And then yeah, now your code should run fine.
Let me just remove the top. How do I remove the top? Oh, there. Oh, okay. I think it did it. Something happened. Oh yeah, it works. I have to skip 2. So I'll just here. It's there. Yeah, okay, I think I got it fixed.
All right.
Okay. So, wait. No, wait. Oh, stop share.